Hi guys, welcome to Legal Drafting. My name's Nicola Corbett-Jarvis and I'm the unit coordinator, and I'm really excited that you've decided to take this elective. It's a practical unit focused on authentic learning based on exercises that you might be expected to do as a trainee or a newly qualified lawyer. Now, just before we start talking about this unit in more detail, I thought I should tell you a little bit about myself. Prior to joining academia, I was a practicing barrister specialising in civil and commercial matters, but I missed research, learning and writing about the law, so I then returned to academia and taught law at JCU for 10 years before finding my way to CQU. So let's talk briefly about what you should expect from this unit in terms of both content and assessment. But let's look at assessment first, because I'm sure that's the bit that's most important for you.
So as you can see on the slide, there are 3 assessment tasks in this unit. There's a quiz worth 20%, a drafting portfolio which you'll complete over the course of the term, which is worth 60%, and also a reflection worth 20%. The quiz is due in week 5 and will focus on foundational drafting principles, grammar, punctuation, and the principles of plain English drafting, all of which are covered in modules 1 to 4. You'll have 90 minutes to complete the quiz, and it will include both multiple choice and short answer questions. There'll be more on that before the quiz is released. The drafting portfolio is submitted incrementally so that you're able to receive regular feedback on your work and improve from one drafting task to the next.
As you can see, the portfolio is worth 60%, but it's actually submitted in 2 parts, both worth 30% in total each. Part 1, which is worth 30% and due in week 7, includes a letter of advice to a client worth 20%, and also a portfolio or collection of the workshop exercises for weeks 1 to 5, and that's worth 10%. Part 2 of the portfolio, again worth 30%, is due in week 11. That includes an outline of argument worth 20%, and also a portfolio or collection of the workshop exercises for weeks 6 to 10.
Some of the documents we'll look at will include contracts, affidavits, pleadings, and wills. The third assessment task, which is the reflection, is really focused on looking at your work over the course of the term and identifying your improvement from one week to the next. It's about identifying your strengths as well as your weaknesses and establishing a plan for improvement in the future. This aligns with reflective practice, which is a necessary skill in legal practice. It's not possible to improve without looking at the work of our supervisors and the work of others, looking at our own work and identifying what we can do to improve. Now, try not to worry about this for now. We'll have a whole workshop in week 11 dedicated to reflection. So once you've looked at that workshop, you'll feel more comfortable with this assessment task.
Now, as I've already mentioned, we'll be learning how to draft a range of legal documents that you might be expected to complete as a trainee or a newly qualified lawyer, including things like letters, contracts, pleadings, so a statement of claim or a defense, and an affidavit. We will also be looking at outlines of argument for those of you that are interested in becoming a barrister. So a broad range of documents. Obviously, we can't cover all of the potential documents that you might be expected to draft in legal practice, but my aim here is over the course of the next 11 weeks to expose you to the most common types of document that a trainee or a newly qualified lawyer will encounter. So let's now move on to some tips for success in the unit. And my first is to engage with the unit on a weekly basis, if that's possible. We're much more likely to see an improvement in our drafting if we are regularly reviewing our drafting, looking at the feedback that we've received, whether that's from the tutor or peers, and then identifying ways that we can improve that draft in the future. Because if we do that, we close the feedback loop and it provides us with a mindset of making sure that we don't make those mistakes in subsequent tasks. Now, I know for some of you that it won't be possible to engage on a weekly basis. You might be fly in, fly out, or have caring responsibilities. If that's the case, just apply the same principle. If you're doing it in chunks of time, a couple of weeks at a time, every so often, then make sure that you review all of the drafting tasks that you've attempted in that block Look at the feedback that has been provided on that, and also make sure that you are identifying what you need to do differently next time so that you don't carry those mistakes forward into the next drafting task that you attempt. My second tip is to post your draft documents on MS Teams or the Moodle forums each week or as regularly as you can to receive feedback from your peers on your draft. Now, I know that that makes you all feel icky. I appreciate that it's an uncomfortable feeling having your work out there, but it's really important that you get used to that uncomfortable feeling of having people view your work. And that's because if you go into the legal sector, our work is constantly on display. So, for example, even as a trainee or a newly qualified, you will be doing work for your supervisor that's placed on the file. So your supervisor will, of course, review it and provide you with feedback, but everyone else working on that file will be able to see what you've done. It's also the case that if you are involved in litigation, you might be writing letters to the other side or drafting pleadings. Again, they will be viewable by your opponent, by the judge, and various clients involved in that litigation. So although it provides a really uncomfortable feeling, it would be really great if we can offer a supportive environment for everybody to provide constructive feedback to each other to really help everybody improve. My next tip is related to the previous one. It's to not only post your own material up there to receive feedback from others, but please make sure you engage in the process of providing feedback to others. That is just as important as receiving feedback. You might think that providing feedback to others is a completely selfless exercise, but that's not, in fact, the case. When we provide feedback to others, we identify their strengths, so what they're doing well, and their weaknesses, so areas where they can improve their drafting. You should also explain how they can improve their draft. In so doing, you are solidifying the principles of good drafting practice in your mind, which means you're much more likely to apply them to your own work in the future. The next two tips are related. So look for examples of poor drafting in everything that you read. And I'm not just talking about legal documents, I'm talking about newspaper articles, even social media posts and memes. It's really important to identify those problematic sections of drafting and think about how you might improve that if you were to edit that document yourself. And if you find anything funny or a good example of poor drafting, post it on MS Teams or Moodle so that we can all see and all comment on and learn from that poor drafting. The next tip, as I said, is related. It's about identifying examples of good drafting and noting why you think it is good. And that's important because, again, it solidifies the principles of effective drafting in our mind, and it means that we're much more likely to apply them in future because they are at the forefront of our mind. My next tip is to always plan your work before you commence the writing process. And if you need to do some research to complete the task, you must do that before you commence drafting as well. And that's because it's really important that the content is set out in a logical format that is tailored to the needs of the reader. And we can only really achieve that through identifying the structure and then adhering to it while we're drafting. Now, the next one is an obvious one, but it's one that's quite often overlooked. It's important to remember that a legal document must comply with formatting requirements. So when you submit pleadings to court, they must conform to the relevant practice direction or the relevant template that the court has provided. It's therefore important that you start paying attention to formatting at this stage in your legal studies so that it becomes habitual by the time that you are in legal practice. And my final tip is to remember that your professionalism is demonstrated through the structure, format, spelling, grammar, and your ability to comply with referencing convention. Now, these are things that are relatively straightforward. Editing your work is a relatively easy process compared to drafting the content and trying to work out how to convey complex information. But it also means that it's quite often left to the last minute, and sometimes it doesn't get any attention at all because we are up against the deadline. So this is a reminder that when people are reading your work, and I'm not just talking about the marker here, I'm talking about your opponent, your supervisor, your client, when they're reading your work, a lot of the sort of minor detail of editing, like structure and format, referencing, conveys a sense of professionalism to the reader. So it is an essential part of the drafting process, and one that should not be taken lightly just because it's the easiest part. Okay, that brings me to the end of this orientation video. I'm really looking forward to meeting you all in the first workshop. I hope you can attend. If not, just say hello on MS Teams or the Moodle forums. And I've set up a little icebreaker activity as well, which is set out in the orientation tile. So it's to post a picture of something that represents where you're at right now. It would be great if you could all introduce yourself to each other on MS Teams and really get to know your peers, because we're all going to be working collaboratively to ensure that we become much more effective in our drafting processes. Okay, so I look forward to seeing you in the first workshop. Thanks for watching.